Hello, my name is Linda Rang. Today I'm going to be presenting a biography about Dr. Kristin Congdon. Kristin Congdon, an American artist, author, and professor in the field of art education, has led a fascinating life filled with travel and adventure. She has held an eclectic array of positions in the field of art education, including the only art teacher at 3 elementary schools, the art teacher at a women's correctional facility, the principal for a school of emotionally disturbed adolescent girls, as well as college professor at the University of Central Florida. In all of these roles, Kristin was determined to help the underserved in the community. She was not afraid to question the authorities at the universities she attended to help raise the awareness of great artists who were not being represented. Born on October 9th, 1948, Kristin was one of 5 children. Her parents, Harold and Brinkley Garrison, her father was a naval officer and her mother a cleric. Growing up in a military family, they moved around quite a bit. Kristin notes this has helped her to be able to quickly adapt to new situations, which has been helpful in her life. At one point, they spent 3.5 years living in London, where her father was involved in diplomatic work. Her parents were products of the 40s and 50s. They held very traditional views when it came to family and roles. They felt boys should hold jobs such as chemists and engineers. Her father was an electrical engineer and would work with her older brother, taking apart toasters and doing chemistry projects together. They also spent time completing woodworking projects in a woodworking shop. Kristin was angry about not being given the opportunity to build rockets. Instead, she was encouraged in the arts. She was given art materials as presents, taken to museums, and given art lessons. This turned out to be a very good thing because she felt very comfortable in the world of art. In the pictures are Kristin's parents and her older brother when they were young. Kristin's father died tragically in a plane crash when she was just 11 years old. Her mother was pregnant at the time with her sixth child. Kristin spent a lot of time after that helping to raise her 2 younger siblings. After high school, Kristin wanted to attend college to study art. Luckily, she received support from the military due to her father's service. The first requirement was for her to see a military psychologist to determine if her IQ was high enough to attend college, which, of course, it was. She felt this was absurd. When she attended college, she wanted to major in art, but the military told her that she couldn't do that because she would not be able to support herself after graduation. So she chose sociology instead. She attended Valparaiso University in Valparaiso, Indiana, where she took her first semester in art appreciation class. It was there that she read Janssen's History of Art. She was concerned that inside the very large volume, she found no women or people of color. She had attended an integrated high school her last 2 years, and this was very important to her. Her art professor was considered a star at the university. She felt uncomfortable asking him about the lack of women, so instead she asked where were all the Black artists. He told her they were all primitive and needed to be studied in anthropology. She felt this was just awful. After 2 years attending college, she decided nobody was paying attention, so she changed her major. She changed it to art with a minor in sociology. When she graduated, that same professor spoke and told all the male graduates that they should follow their hearts and in art education. She told the females that they needed to get degrees in education and not art. She found this belittling and felt that it set the course for her. During her last semester in college, she did an internship at an all-Black junior high school in Gary, Indiana. She was very interested in education but found the position to be very challenging. She tried to introduce Black art, but she couldn't find any books. So, Instead, she introduced African art, and the students hated it. They laughed and they were embarrassed. They felt like it was disparaging to them. She graduated from Valparaiso University in 1970 with a BA in art and minors in sociology and philosophy. After graduation, Kristin married her college sweetheart, David Congdon, a social service administrator. She went on to work towards her master's degree in art education at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. She graduated with her master's in June of 1972. Afterwards, she began work as the only art teacher at 3 elementary schools, teaching 1,800 inner city children. 2 of these schools were segregated, all Black, and the other one was integrated. 2 years later, they moved to Wisconsin so her husband could pursue his master's degree. This is where she got a job at a women's correctional facility through the Catholic Social Services. This was a maximum security jail. She was paid as an instructor from the technical college. Kristin enjoyed this position immensely. She says her students were wonderful and some of the most loving people she had ever met. 2 of the women, who were both convicted of murder, were extremely loving and caring, especially to the incoming new inmates, who were oftentimes traumatized. These women were helpful and encouraging to the others. This job was then expanded to include a medium security facility at the Franklin House of Correction. She did this for several years. Next, Kristin was recruited to become the principal of an emotionally disturbed adolescent girl residential treatment center that was run by the Salvation Army. At the time, people with mental and physical disabilities were being released from institutions, and there were no mental health support systems available. The regulations stated that these students must have special teachers. Kristin felt that she was recruited because they thought she was tough, having worked with inmates at the correctional facility. She says this was not necessarily so. She had guards with her at all times. She took this job because she is passionate about helping people. She said, "I've got to keep as many people out of jail and prison as I possibly can." She did this job for a few years until finances stopped coming through and the center was forced to close. Her next position was working for the foster grandparent program through the government. She states that this was a wonderful program that helped elderly people stay engaged. The people, who were mostly Black females, would ride the bus to the Head Start programs to help the teachers who had their hands full. They would do things like comfort children who were missing their parents by holding them and rocking them. They became known as the grandmas. This made her think back to when she taught art in the 1970s to the children at the junior high who were embarrassed by African art. This is when she decided she wanted to go back to study folk art because this is where she was finding Black art. It didn't have much visibility. She asked her professor at Indiana University if she could work with him, but he told her it was not important there. She lived near Madison, Wisconsin, so she checked there, and they said they would love to have her. However, they were not interested in folk art. It wasn't considered good art. She found the philosophy of art education at the time was that of a hierarchical nature and was taught down, having to study the grand masters who were all white males. She thought back at the time teaching the women in the correctional facility and what they had taught her. At that time, she was not allowed to bring paint in for her art lessons for fear that the women would steal it to make tattoos or sniff it. So she decided she was going to teach them drawing, but they were not interested. They wanted to sew and macrame. So they began to sew using old denim from the men's old blue jeans. They made skirts and halter tops. They embroidered them with designs and stories, and they made little booties for their babies. She was meeting the needs of the community of the women inmates, and it was coming from their culture. This was very powerful. Kristin had a desire to be respected as an educator studying folk art, so she was encouraged to study with Dr. June McPhee at the University of Oregon. Dr. McPhee taught in the Department of Art Education from 1965 to 1984. Her background was in anthropology and psychology. Kristin had to talk her husband into moving from Wisconsin to Oregon to work towards her PhD. That was tough because he had just started at a new, very good job. However, the following year in Wisconsin, the winter was very harsh and there was a lot of snow. So her husband agreed. They ended up moving, and in 1983, she received her PhD in art education with her dissertation in theoretical approach for teaching folk art in an education setting. Dr. June McPhee became her greatest mentor and good friend. She says she will always be grateful for her support and her interest in folk art. She supported her in this field when no one else would. They remained in contact until Dr. McPhee's death. Kristin began to realize that there were two very different views of folk art. The historian's view was that it was primitive and unsophisticated. However, folklorists were interested in looking at folk art as something that came from a traditional community. The two groups were bitterly angry at each other for their defining labels. Kristin was interested in bringing the two disciplines together, folklore and art history. She states that we don't use the word primitive or unsophisticated anymore. In fact, folk art is very sophisticated. We now recognize the strength of the message being communicated in the work of the folk artist and the context. Art historians have now changed, and in that they used to not be interested in the context as they are today. Kristin has since taught at the University of Central Florida in the departments of art, film, and philosophy. She is currently Professor Emeritus of Philosophy and Humanities at the University of Central Florida. Folk art is usually looked in the context of a time and a place of a particular culture or group of people. A very good example of folk art is the quilts of Gee's Bend. A Georgian family began collecting quilts made by Black women in Alabama who generationally created amazing quilts. Some say they did modernism even before it existed. These quilts were made in the aesthetics of Africa. They were not precise, but rather the quilter used improvisational lines like that of jazz. In Africa, you would not use straight lines because evil spirits could land on these. Instead, they made lines that played like jazz. It moved around and was protective. They are beginning to create exhibitions showcasing these quilts. This has added to big changes happening in the art world, and the visibility of folk art is largely responsible. Here is an example of some artists that Kristin got a chance to meet and even befriend. Ruby Williams became a good friend of Kristin's, and she became famous for her folk art when she had her fruit stand that she was selling produce, and she made signs to go with her fruit stands that people just loved. Taft Richardson made sculptures from old animal bones, and Mary Proctor is a folk artist from Tallahassee, Florida. Kristin is the author of or contributor of numerous books, mostly nonfiction. Among them are Just Above the Water, Florida Folk Art, Community Art in Action, and The Making of an Artist, Desire, Courage, and Commitment. These are just a few of the many books that she has written in the area of folk art and community-based teaching. She is currently working on a nonfiction book about the hidden lynchings that occurred close to her home in Florida. She says Florida has had some of the worst lynchings in history from 1877 to 1950 in the country per capita. In fact, a massacre occurred in the 1920s in the city of Ocoee, Florida, which is close to where she lives. The people of the town were unaware of this because it was kept hidden for almost 100 years. Her book is about what her group did to provide awareness of the lynchings. It was mostly done through the arts, such as exhibitions, poetry, and theater. This is an example of how the arts can be used for racial justice. Kristin says, writing this book has been very difficult. The group has interviewed family members that were unaware this even happened. The white people didn't want to talk about it, and the Black people wanted to protect their children from potential harm. She says getting people to discuss the historical truth is difficult but necessary to help fix the racial divide. They are working on locating the burial areas of the mass graves to help identify the names of the people who are buried there. It is very important and hard work. She says we need to remember the history of the past in order to heal from things such as these. If we don't, it gets into our DNA and it is passed down through the generations. Kristin is well known for her work in community-based art education. When asked what her philosophy of education is, she responded, community, community, community. Context matters. Function matters. This can be seen throughout her career as the sole teacher in the elementary schools in Indiana, her work at the Women's Correctional Facility in Wisconsin, and her job working with elderly Black women for the foster grandparent program. There she strived to learn about the community and provide experiences that had meaning to the people. The themes throughout her career have been to give the respect and awareness deserved by underrepresented groups such as women and Black artists, which reflects a postmodernist philosophy. She has worked tirelessly to achieve these goals for many years. Kristin has received numerous well-deserved awards and honors throughout her career. But when asked what she is most proud of, she says, I'm most pleased that I was able to expand the field of art education to artists who had not been valued or visible before. She would like her legacy in art education to broaden our perspectives and to use art to give us more humanity. One of her favorite quotes is, there are always flowers for those who want to see them. This quote by Henry Matisse represents her positive spirit. Kristin has shown strength and perseverance throughout her lifetime. She is such a humble person and so well respected in her field. We should all aspire to be more like Kristin Congdon.